Good evening, everyone. We are going to start slowly and allow our participants to come in and get everyone into the Zoom room, as we say. My name is Amy Foster. Welcome to the Pride Perspective webinar series for 2024-2025. It's been a little bit since I've had the honor of helping with one of these webinars, so I'm excited to be back in the saddle, as they say. And our topic tonight is why are boys and men struggling in education? And there's so much that, I think hopefully an hour will give us enough time. It's enough of a topic to go on for more than an hour. But without further ado, I will allow our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening. I'm Katie Allen Berlandy, and I am the Dean of Counseling here at Trinity-Pawling School and have the good fortune to teach a psychology class in the science department as well.
Good evening. My name is Gabe Avis, and I am the chair of the art department, as well as the director of our practicum here at Trinity-Pawling.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Frost. I am the chair of the Modern Language Department and the leader of the Environmental Stewardship Institute.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Curley. I'm the Dean of Teaching and Learning, and I'm also a history teacher, and I oversee the academics here at Trinity-Pawling School.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Taylor. I'm head of school and currently a displaced history teacher.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm just taking a look. Yeah, our participants are still streaming in, but we'll start with our topic. We are in, and always have been, except for a couple years, a boys' school. We did have a female component late 70s, early 80s for just a short time, but we've found with good reason that many boys learn best when they are with boys. And we've done a lot of research along the way. We have worked a great deal with some organizations internationally who specialize in boys education, the International Boys Schools Coalition being one of them. And we've all been, fortunate enough to learn a great deal about why boys education works. So we're going to delve into that topic and some of the research a little bit tonight. And we will, as we just still have our participants coming in, we'll make use of, what is familiar for most people now, the chat at the bottom of the screen. You could use the chat to raise any concerns or the Q&A. I'll be watching both of those as moderator as the panelists go on. So if any questions or thoughts come up, please use one of those too. You could also use the raise hand feature, and we'll monitor. That'll be my position to monitor that. So I think everybody's familiar with the Zoom procedure, something we had no clue about 5 years ago when we were all pre-COVID, but one of the benefits, I guess. So Bill, I will start by asking you, what are some of your thoughts as to why boys are behind in education? And I'm sorry, I'm just going to add one more thought. I was on an IBSC webinar just the other night with women who work at boarding schools around the world. And so it's not just the US, but there's definitely evidence of it happening, all around the world. So anyway, Bill, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Amy. And again, good evening, everybody. And just maybe a quick adjustment. I'm not sure if I know we can't see everybody who's out there, so the raise hand feature may not work. So the Q&A button is probably the best way to engage with us during the course of the next hour. But thank you for taking some time to be with us this evening. This is a very important topic, certainly for us and for anybody who has a son or is a boy in school. It's an extremely important and I think timely topic only because the data has coalesced in the last few years to really draw attention to the challenges that boys and young men are facing, not just educationally, but socially, emotionally, and also increasingly economically. And as I look at all this data, I cannot help but think that they're all connected. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but just let me set the landscape a little educationally. And before, this is my 10th year as being a head at Trinity-Pawling School. I did begin my career here, so I began my teaching career teaching boys. I did that for 13 years, and then I left, and I was the head of a co-ed day school for 14 years. So I've seen both day and boarding and co-ed and boys schools, and I can tell you that boys learn differently in an all boys environment. They engage differently in an all boys environment than they do in a co-ed environment. And having not taught girls in an all girls environment, I can understand why that they also learn differently and engage differently in a single sex environment. And I'm not advocating one over the other. I think there needs to be both, because there are certainly advantages to a co-ed learning environment that single sex schools cannot immediately address because of the demographic makeup of our schools. But let me just share some data with you as it relates to boys and girls in high school. Over the last couple of years, in American high schools, secondary schools, 80% of the valedictorians in our schools in America are girls, young women. 75% of our honor rolls in this country, in our schools, public and independent, are made up of girls. And so you can look at that data just in high schools and see a pretty distinct difference in how boys and girls are navigating their way through those learning environments. And that difference just becomes more pronounced in college. For the last couple of years, the demographic split or makeup of an entering freshman class in American colleges and universities has been 60% young women compared to 40% young men. Now, 40 years ago, that would have been 50-50. If you go back 60 years ago, that would have been drastically skewed in favor of boys. But there were tremendous advances in how schools taught girls and made sure that we're providing educational opportunities that were equal for girls as they were for boys. That led to a 50-50 demographic split when it became time for many of them to go to college. So a 60-40 split has been something that has emerged over the last 30 to 40 years. When you carry that through into college, the graduation rates today in college for the last several years have been 70% women, 30% men. And it's estimated that that chasm is going to grow even more pronounced in the next 6 years. By graduation in 2030, there will be 2 female college graduates for every male college graduate. And so the drop-off of engagement for boys in high school continues on into college, and then certainly the split into graduate school is even more significant, women to men. And that is significant. This summer there was analysis of a test that many independent schools give. It's the test student engagement, and these are independent school statistics. So tuition charging schools, students going to these schools families are paying tuition. Only 30% of the boys in these schools, these independent schools, said they were motivated by a desire to get good grades. 30% of the boys. Only 18% of the boys in independent schools who took this test say that they were even motivated to learn. And so those are some pretty startling statistics educationally. And I'm going to get to my thoughts as to why they exist here in a moment. But let me just share with you some social statistics. Boys and young men have become increasingly more isolated in society over the past several years. 15% of boys report having no close friends. There are more young men that spend more time living alone and being alone than young women. Just in the past 6 years, there's been an increase in this statistic. In 2018, young men, this would be men in their 20s, reported spending 5.4 waking hours a day alone. But since 2018, this number has risen to 6.6 waking hours being spent alone by young men in their early 20s, which is an hour more a day, or more than that, than young women of the same age. You could look at the same statistic of men who are in the ages of 25 to 34, and you see an increase of those young men who are living at home. That number in 1960 was 10%. 10% of the young men in between ages 25 to 34 lived at home. And it's doubled that, more than doubled that by today. So 1/5 of the male population between the ages of 25 and 34 live at home. There are fewer dating relationships being recorded. The marriage rates are much lower than they were 10 to 15 years ago, and certainly lower childbirth rates in the last 15 years. Emotionally, men report being more isolated. In high school, in adolescent years, there are higher rates of mental illness for adolescent girls than there are for boys. But if you look at suicide rates, there's a drastically higher rate for teenage and early adult suicide rates among young men and boys and young men than for women, which is alarming. And then economically, some of the challenges, a much higher unemployment rate for young men than for young women. And you could look at some of the college statistics as being contributing to that, but even not including that, people who are not going to college, there is a higher unemployment rate for young men than young women. There are 700,000 fewer men in the economic workforce today than there were 10 years ago. And that represents a significant dollar amount of lost capital that's being earned. In 2000, 94% of eligible working men were actively engaged in the workforce. Today, that number is 88%, so a loss of 6%, which may not seem like a large number, but when you start putting dollar signs next to it, it's a significant economic number. So what's going on? Where do all these factors come together? If there was a simple solution, there wouldn't be this much concern. But as an educator, I can look to what's happened in schools over the last 40 years. The way we taught schools changed 40 years ago, beginning in the early to mid 1980s. This country, for all the right reasons, became very, very concerned with how the educational statistics of our students were being compared internationally to other countries. And it was lower, and that caused people to take notice. The reading rates were lower, the math rates were lower. And so the recommendation was we need to increase the standards. I'm certainly not opposed to that. We need to have high standards in education. But the way that we began to measure that was by testing, increasing testing at a pretty prolific level. When you add regular testing into the school day, you are also adding greater memorization of the data for the test into the school day, which takes away opportunities for active learning. It took away opportunities for collaborative learning. When the curriculum became much more specific, and in American high schools in the early to mid 80s, electives started to be taken away from the curriculum, and a curriculum became much more rigid. That took away, for both boys and girls, the opportunity to exercise autonomy over what they were learning, some choice. It also took away the opportunity for them to better see the relevance of what they were learning and why it was important, not just for a test that they had to take, for a grade that wouldn't even factor into their grade. So we began to remove autonomy from the learning process and relevance from the learning process. Now, both boys and girls like autonomy. Both boys and girls need to understand the relevance of what they're doing. Both boys and girls certainly can engage in memorization skills. Girls at that age, in adolescent years and younger, can do that better than boys. By the time a girl is 10 to 12 years old, their brain is already more developed than the male brain. By the time that they are in high school, their brain is about 2 to 3 years more developed than the male brain at the same age. And the key difference is being in the cerebral cortex, the frontal lobe, where organizational skills are being learned, where the frontal lobe is where you begin to associate consequences with action, and to be able to plan, if I do this, then this is what I'm going to get for them, for that action. Or if I do this, what might be the negative aspect of what that would entail? In economic terms, what are the opportunity costs for either doing this or not doing that? Girls in the adolescent years can do that much better than boys. Girls can memorize better than boys. Girls can sit still for longer at that age than boys. And so the learning environment in our schools, from elementary schools through the high schools, became much more rigid, became much more rigorous in that sense, being rigid. And relevance and autonomy began to be removed from the learning experience. And with that went engagement. And that, in my opinion, is where a lot of this is coming from. A sort of a subtraction of engagement in the learning experience for both boys and girls. But you see the manifestations of that much more directly with boys. And with lack of engagement in the learning process, the reason that engagement is so important in the learning process, especially during childhood and adolescence, is because it's directly linked to self-awareness. If you're engaged in what you're learning, you're also engaged in what excites you about learning, what gives you a sense of relevance of how this might be important in your life. I've discovered that I like this subject, or I'm good in writing, or I'm not good in writing. I prefer math. I prefer science. That's all self-awareness. That comes from engagement. So if we've taken engagement out of the learning environment, or reduced it, and created more sterility to pursue greater data, we've also taken away opportunities for greater self-awareness. So that, in my opinion, is at the core of what has happened, combined with what we now know is significant differences in brain development in the adolescent years. So with that, I'm going to pivot to my colleague, Tom Curley, Dean of Teaching and Learning, to talk a little bit about the important aspects of teaching boys. Now, in an all-boys environment, we're experts at teaching boys. We know how to leverage this energy. We know how to create vigor and replace rigor with vigor in that dynamic that I like to speak about often. So, Tom, talk a little bit about your thoughts on how we at Trinity-Pawling are engaging boys, but you're also a graduate of a boys' school, and how that was important in your own learning.
Sure. So I think for me, what we find, what I've found working at other boys' school and at Trinity-Pawling is that engagement becomes the key piece. And how do we then bring these boys and get them engaged and get them fired up and interested in the learning? And I think there's a number of factors to that. We certainly see relevance and making sure that we can provide the real world relevance, real world application for all of our education, and autonomy comes along with that. So as you just said, Bill, the idea that the only point of learning this, whatever it is to take the test and move on to the next unit. Well, that's not very inspiring to young men, for sure. They want to know, okay, how am I going to use this once I'm out of high school? How am I going to use this in college? How will I use it in the workforce? And so we think a lot about that in our classrooms as teachers. Then I think the next layer there is autonomy. When can the young man say, actually, I'd like to learn about this thing that seems tangential to what the teacher might have walked in the room thinking they were going to teach about? And from experience here and in other places that are successful with boys' education, teachers are understanding of that and flexible enough to allow that man to pursue that interest in the next 2 weeks, maybe, or create a side assignment that person can follow along and give them a sense of their ownership of what it is that they're learning. That's, I think, hugely important to young men. And I think along with that, and we're going to hear a lot about this, is the importance of relationships. And there's two sides of this. One is relationship with the teacher or with the mentor. The other is the relationship with the other boys in the school and in the class. So by developing classes that are small, that are ready to be flexible, where we live with our students, right? Most of us are on campus, that student will see us as a coach one day and out walking our dog the next day, and then in class working on math on a third day. They see us as full human beings. We're not just that teacher in the classroom, that sort of sterile personality. And that creates a huge amount of buy-in and investiture by the students in the room. They probably know more about us than we might like them to, but that brings with it a sense of responsibility to a real human being. It's not sort of a caricature of the teacher standing up there droning on about something. This is somebody who you might have been in their house and help them cook a meal and eaten in their dining room. And that is really, really important, I think, for our young men's experience here. And then you have the relationship with the other boys around you in the class. So for that, I think we leverage a couple of really important pieces for boys, which is collaborative teamwork and individual competition, which seem like they are maybe run up against each other, but with so much of our, every boy does athletics here, we can bring that athletic mindset, that team mindset to the classroom and say, okay, here's what, like, I was just doing this with study guides the other day. We're coming up on exam week, walking around and having my boys observe each other's notebooks and saying, what is this guy missing? Here's your sticky notes. You have to add to this, to your friend's notebook, and let him know what he should be having in his notes. And they're all doing it. They're all saying, oh, okay, I can help. And so that sort of collaborative work really gets a lot of buy-in and engagement from our students. And on the flip side of that, anytime you can run a quiz game, anytime you can have a speed drill in your class, you will find that the young men get up, get engaged, get ready to compete. But it's never cutthroat. It's always with a good attitude. And so I think those are ways in which our long understanding of young men in the classroom has really helped. And there are other parts of that, which is we need to provide structure as well. We're not offering free-for-alls here, but that we have a regular structure, we have predictable routines, we have predictable consequences, we have accountability for these young men, and they appreciate that as well. They butt up against it sometimes, but in the long run, we know from alumni that they really appreciate a good set of structures as well.
Well, and that's a really important part when we talk about autonomy. I mean, the autonomy has to exist within a framework, and boys and teenagers in general, boys and girls, they're going to exercise their autonomy in a much more productive, healthy way if they know exactly where the guardrails are. And the guardrails, like they are in any road, they are there before the real danger is there. And so we'd rather have them bump up against the guardrails than actually, go through the guardrails and hit the tree.
Right, and I think it is guardrails or bumpers on your bowling lane that autonomy must have a degree of accountability, and we can raise and lower that accountability depending on the situation. So when you hear from Gabe Avis later about moving up in our winter session until the seniors are working really independently and are very free to do a project of their own devising, it's because they have worked through places with more strictures, with more guardrails. And I think that's really important.
I just want to circle back to what you said, Tom, about the relationship aspect of that. And certainly in a boarding school, that's key. As you said, 90% of the faculty are living here on campus. So those relationships really develop in a far more organic way that has lots of depth to it. And the way that we view ourselves as teachers here, is that of being a mentor, which is, I think it is a deeper level than just a teacher, because this self-awareness that I spoke about, which is it's such a critical aspect of how we've shaped curriculum here, how we've defined what is important here educationally. It all comes back to self-awareness. And what we mean by that is, are we developing for our students an awareness where they begin to ask themselves, what are my gifts? What are my talents? And they are using that language because we use this language all the time. Share your gifts and talents. We are sharing our gifts and talents as educators to this community. And so we want the boys to begin to say, okay, what are my gifts? What are my talents? What interests me? What brings me happiness? And when a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old boy is beginning to ask those questions, they are unlocking sort of greater depths of their own self-awareness. But the teachers, the mentors, play a critical role in that here, because it's the teachers, the mentors that are beginning to say, I'm seeing this, really, I'm seeing you light up when you do this. I had a boy in my office just earlier today, and he was asking about a particular club that we're trying to build here. And he said, I just don't know if it'd be worth it. I said, I know you, and this is something you're going to get a lot out of, and it's going to require more time, but you're going to get a lot more out of it. And I saw his face kind of light up. He goes, I think you're right. And so that mentorship is really important. And that also, the mentorship and these relationships also help boys develop a greater awareness that vulnerability is really a strength. When you learn how to take healthy risks and you're vulnerable, you're actually growing in character, but you're also growing in your own self-awareness. And with that, I'd like to transition to Katie, to you, Katie, you're our Dean of Counseling, And talk about the importance of relationships, self-awareness, and the role that vulnerability plays in this as boys are navigating their way through this time in their lives.
Well, thank you, Bill. Self-awareness and vulnerability, there's a real strong correlation between the two of them, a real positive relationship between the two of them. And in order to become self-aware, there has to be an element of vulnerability, right? That I'm willing to recognize my emotions, acknowledge my emotions, think about the things that light my face up, think about the things that rub me the wrong way, right? And then from there, gaining that greater sense of self-awareness, they're more willing to try new things, to break some barriers, perhaps. Clearly, adolescence is a time of self-discovery and identity formation. What do these adolescents believe in, the individuals believe in? Where do they see themselves in this world? It's quite a not as long of a window as we would like. It's a very time-sensitive window, right, in terms of development and developing in adolescence, where belief systems are challenged, right? Peers challenge belief systems, outside forces challenge belief systems. And so what do these boys need around them to try and create a very strong and positive sense of self, which involves a strong sense of self-awareness, right? So many physical and emotional changes are going on, and they're trying to balance academics and their athletics and their extracurriculars. And to your point, Bill, they still don't have this fully formed prefrontal cortex. So balancing anything it can be difficult. Balancing a schedule can be difficult when you're thinking about trying to balance your emotions and your social world and your academics and your extracurriculars. It's a lot on their plates. But what we here at Trinity-Pawling do, as Bill and Tom were speaking about, is to encourage self-awareness through own self-discovery, through vulnerability, and for these boys to be authentically who they are as best as they possibly can be at this stage in their lives. And we are so fortunate here for so many things, but our size is fantastic for the opportunity for there to be so many valuable relationships for these students to have with adults and certainly with others as well. So we see we're able to see it in real time a lot around here, which is a real blessing as an educator. How can we help here, and how do we help every single day with encouraging self-awareness in our boys? And in turn, encouraging their vulnerability. I think we do it in many ways. We focus on what their purposes are, their goals are, Bill, to your point, what their gifts and talents. We encourage them in self-reflection, right? Whether that's in a class, in an English class, or in an art class, or out throughout the experiences with our institutes. Maybe we also encourage in some ways for them to say no when they should say no to either something that their plate is getting too full, or they're feeling drawn in to do something that they know that runs up against their belief system. We can encourage them to say no and support them in that. I think here at Trinity-Pawling, and Bill, you're the spearheader of this, is that this sense of belonging. When one feels a sense of belonging, that gives greater opportunity for self-reflection and to try new things in a safe space. Building healthy relationships, and I think one of the things that we talk a lot about, and the research talks a lot about, is vulnerability that challenges a lot of masculine stereotypes, right? And we can have open conversations with our students about that, and helping them to challenge their negative stereotype, or the negative stereotypes that are out there, or even the ones within themselves that they're feeling a rub with. So we talk about mentoring, which sort of is synonymous in many ways with modeling, right? And Amy and I are fortunate to be working with so many male colleagues, and I think there's hopefully a proud responsibility of all the male colleagues to model for our young men, in helping them to understand who they are and what their emotions mean, and giving them some language around how they're feeling, which I think is really important, and reinforcing, positive expressions of emotion and communication, and finally, for us, being vulnerable around our students, right? When we're struggling with, all within the appropriate range of communication, right? But when we're struggling with something, or we don't know the answer to something, or we decide we're going to try a new adventure, right? I'm going to learn how to ride a unicycle, right? Might maybe tell them that, and then I'm going to tell them how that went, right? So that's modeling in a form also, in terms of in terms of acknowledging self-awareness and vulnerability. So that the relationship is strong between self-awareness and vulnerability.
Thank you. I want to circle back to, with the idea of vulnerability and self-awareness sort of in mind, circle back to something I mentioned earlier, and that is, how do we engage vigor into the learning environment? And a lot of the ways that we do that is through experiential learning, through project-based learning. And when we do that as educators, we actually, our students don't know that we are exercising vulnerability, but, teachers are comfortable in their classroom. When we as teachers get out of the classroom, that introduces some great unknowns into the dynamic. Yet we know by research that that we as humans actually are healthier when we're outside, when we are out in nature. And students as learners actually learn better when they are outside, when they can understand their relationship with nature. And so our experiential learning component here happens both in the classroom, but importantly, it happens all over campus. And we have almost 300 acres here. And we have a little bit more acreage than we do for each student, which is amazing. And so that factors in. So I'd like Josh, I'd like to turn to you to talk a little bit about experiential learning. You do that in a lot of ways in the classroom, outside of the classroom. You're also the director of our Environmental Institute. We have 4 institutes that are designed to get boys outside of the classroom. We do this mostly during our Saturday academic programming schedule, but we have an Environmental Institute, we have a Leadership Institute, a Citizenship Institute, and an Entrepreneurial Institute. And the boys work their way through all 4 of these institutes, and they're learning important skills associated with each of those disciplines, but they're learning them in active ways. So, Josh, talk a little bit about your experience with experiential learning and what you see and how boys engage in that type of dynamic.
Sure, Bill. Thank you for inviting me. And I will do my best to speak a little bit, but I'm going to be finding that challenging because there's a lot happening. And so I'll try to keep it short. But yeah, when I graduated Trinity-Pawling in 2004, the opportunities I'm about to talk about didn't exist. And I wish that they had. But I'm so glad to be a part of it now. So I'm hoping that I can, give you all an idea of what experiential and outdoor education looks like right now, and then maybe pivot to some observations about what the boys think about that, how they react, and its efficacy. Every year we've been increasing the opportunities for hands-on, active experiential learning. And this is sort of the point where the theory that you would be talking about in a traditional classroom is meeting practicality. As Tom Curley might say, let's stop talking about the thing and go do the thing, and get outside. And so the freshmen right now, I know are they're learning about circuits, but they're making RC cars and 3D printing the bodies of the cars, and that's what their science class has been involved in for a few weeks. So there's all kinds of things happening. We've got the makerspace I just mentioned. We have a wood shop where the boys are learning how to use hand tools and traditional joinery. We have the campus farm that's up on part of those 300 acres there where the boys are helping to grow vegetables and fruits. We have an apiary, so they're helping take care of the bees. Even within the classroom, as you heard, that I chair the modern language department, and we're experimenting with, how a language class could look different and be more experiential. So Spanish 5 right now is not a literature course so much as it is, it's an art course almost, where they're creating art together, and they're not, of course, being graded on the art. They're being graded on the communication that they're using to achieve that end, but they're doing creating something physically with their hands in Spanish class, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback from the boys on that. So perhaps well, the opportunities for kinesthetic learning are off the charts when you're outside, and I think it's probably most visible with my institute, and I feel grateful to be leading the Environmental Stewardship Institute on a place like this because it's easy. There's so much to do here, so many ways to get the boys outside, so many different ecosystems present on our campus that it really isn't hard to do. But just to give you all an idea of what we did this fall in our mission to connect boys with the natural world and help them develop or strengthen a relationship with the outdoors. We had honey extraction and apiary work. We were taking local hikes. We have a camping tent that fits 20 people up on our property, and so 20 juniors went up in October and spent the night camping. Many of them had never been camping before, so that was an amazing experience for them. We went canoeing this fall in the Great Swamp. We do ecology walks, survival shelter building. You'll see the picture behind me was actually from this fall. That was the freshman class, and they were standing still for about 5 minutes, and the rest of the morning they were learning how to create survival shelters. They had an hour to do that on a Saturday morning, and then it needed to withstand the deluge from a 5-gallon bucket of water to see if it was waterproof. None of them were, but they had a blast romping around in the woods creating those. It was amazing watching, just seeing the joy on their faces as they worked together to gather their materials in the woods. So, we've done fly fishing and building bat houses. There's all kinds of things that we can do, and that's what Saturday morning looks like. When I was a student, I was sitting in class on Saturday morning, and I can tell you that this is a much better experience and use of our time on a Saturday morning, in my opinion. So, how do the boys react to this? For the third time now, in my woodworking class, a student has said, "You know what? I would rather take this class and be in here than have a free period." And there's not much higher compliment you can get around here than that, because they value their free periods because they're so busy. And so that meant a lot to me to hear that again. And I actually asked them in that class to bring their advisor in, and their task for their final assessment was to teach their advisors some of the skills that they had learned. And the adults came in and struggled, and the boys really could see how much they had actually learned in this term class. But my question for them wasn't, what did you learn about woodworking? It was, what did you learn about yourself this term? And it took them a moment to think about it, but because woodworking is slow. When you're using hand tools, the progress is not fast, and so a lot of them found themselves frustrated at times, or finding success at other times, and genuine joy at having completed something the way they had envisioned it, or having recovered from a problem or a challenge that arose. So they're great. If they're working in the beehives or they're, running our maple syrup evaporator using a hand plane or romping around in the woods, I'm finding that they find it easier to be themselves, to express their uncertainty and fear and frustration, and also their gratitude and kindness, confidence, and definitely creativity. So those spaces provide opportunity for the boys to show me those and show themselves, learn those emotions that in a normal classroom they might not. And I've also found that really very often the boys who struggle to distinguish themselves in a traditional classroom, who just are a little late to raise their hand and never quite jump in and have good ideas but don't share them, when the setting changes and we're now outside or we're in the wood shop or we're up at the farm, the game changes, and those boys are the ones who emerge as leaders. They might be the first one to put on the bee suit, and there's a lot of kids who are afraid to put on a bee suit or drive a tractor, and we don't force them, obviously, but over time, watching their classmates do it, most of them are willing to give it a shot. So I love seeing how, those boys so that pivot when they move outdoors. So I heard this recently, the idea floated that boys and men are more likely to open up to each other if they're working shoulder to shoulder rather than speaking face to face. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it sort of resonates with my experience here. So yeah, I think I've answered your question, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. And, you know, you've done a great job of describing sort of how the choices that we as a school have made to leverage time and space to create different learning opportunities for boys. And you used the term game changer. And I think when schools do that, they're revealing their priorities. And when we do that as a school, we are revealing our priorities of teaching boys, and that we are making decisions because we are making them as a boys' school, a boys' boarding school, where we have greater control over time. We have all this space that we can leverage, and we have the energy of boys to add to that engagement. And so I want to shift to you, Gabe, because we're about ready to head into our winter session, which is a series of graduation requirements, as are the institutes that Josh just talked about. But this represents, really using time a little differently, but creating these avenues that are specifically designed to help boys develop a deeper sense of their own self-awareness by having them be engaged in project-based learning. So, Gabe, talk a little bit about what you're working on and what we're going to experience when the boys come back after Thanksgiving break.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Also, just want to say just how exciting it is to hear what everyone on the panel has just said. It's truly inspiring to be with this bunch and all the faculty here, just hearing what they have to say about experiential learning, life here at TP, and this is a great topic to discuss. In terms of the winter session, very similar to what Josh just reiterated, and how the winter session here at Trinity-Pawling is really rooted in experiential learning. Bill sort of mentioned earlier that time, as well as money, is a very valuable resource here at school. And at Trinity-Pawling, we have invested a lot of time for our winter session. Our winter session here at Trinity-Pawling is the time period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, where for 2 weeks, each student delves really, really deep into topics, ideas, discussions across the board. Our freshmen and sophomores take what's called our winter projects. And those range anywhere from a coaching philosophy course to building Rube Goldberg machines. Josh Frost last year led a very successful winter project where he and a group of freshmen and sophomores not only built a maple sugaring shack, but also tapped the maple trees and created maple sugar from our own campus, which is truly remarkable. And so that takes place during those 2 weeks. Our juniors and our postgrads participate in something that's really unique and exciting here at Trinity-Pawling called the Global Collaborative Challenge. And what that is for the 2 weeks, a randomly assigned group of students are given a globally pressing question. And for those 2 weeks, they research, they develop, they talk to experts in the field, they go on field trips all around New York and into the city. And at the end of the 2 weeks, they are given they give a 12-minute presentation. And so that's a really a unique opportunity for a lot of our students to delve into collaboration. You're in a random group with people who you may have never met before, and you have to come up with an answer, a unified answer. And not only a unified answer, but you guys need to come up with a 12-minute presentation to give to the school. And then lastly, with our senior independent projects, that is really where that autonomy conversation is exciting. A lot of our boys develop these ideas back all the way into their junior year, going into their summer and coming back in the fall ready to go. I really love that analogy of having guardrails, because with these senior independent projects, they're given a faculty advisor. The faculty advisor works with them to make sure that they're meeting all their deadlines and their checklists. So there is that autonomy, but very similar to our approach here at Trinity-Pawling, there are those guardrails that allow our students to continue to move forward. I just rattled off a lot of tangible ideas and projects, a lot of projects that at the end of the 2 weeks, they walk home with a cornhole set that they just spent 2 weeks building, or something tangible that a senior did a few years ago was building or creating a original play that was a production here at Trinity-Pawling. I talked a little bit about how winter projects, students went home with a little thing of maple syrup. But not only during the winter session are we making something tangible, a lot of our boys are working on soft skills and developing soft skills throughout these 2 weeks. So they're working on collaboration. They're working on their communication skills. They're working on how to research. They're working on their self-awareness. And all of this does is just reinforce confidence into our students. So at the end of the 2 weeks, they have something that not only is tangible, but something that's of interest for them. Last night, we had our Global Collaborative Challenge question draft, where our students pick their question that they are going to delve into for 2 weeks. And Bill said on the way out, he was like, I don't know if they understand that that's the easiest part, is picking your question. The hardest part is to research and develop and come up with a unified answer. So I think a lot of students now are beginning to realize that, no, this is a very, very important tradition and project here, where they're not just walking out with the answers to the question. They're walking out with a 12-minute public speaking class. They're walking out with collaborating with students that they've never met before. They're walking out with self-awareness of, you know what, I just did a question on the future of human space exploration. That's really interesting to me, and maybe that changes my college trajectory. And then in terms of, the SIP or the Senior Independent Project, yes, again, they walk out with something tangible, but they're also leaving with a sense of independence, maybe a new or a deeper understanding of a skill, whether it be woodworking or playwriting or research or music theory, as well as a passion of theirs is our hope. And then just going back to our mission here at Trinity-Pawling, where we're trying and helping our boys discover their unique gifts and talents. The hope is at the end of the 2 weeks that they do have those distinct gifts and talents. I'll just end with, I always think of hypothetical questions to ask, like an auditorium of college-aged freshmen, and I always wonder, if you ask most incoming freshmen if they had 2 weeks during their high school career to delve into something, whether it be something really minute or something very large, it doesn't matter. But if you had 2 weeks to really delve into something, I don't think we'd see a lot of hands raised. So going back to the use of time and the investment of time, having these 2 weeks for our boys to truly invest into their gifts and talents is really truly remarkable. So it's an exciting time. I love watching how a history classroom can become a culinary kitchen for some weird reason. I love how my art classroom can become the stage of a Roman theater performance. I love how our woods can become a maple sugaring factory. I think a factory might be too big of a word. I think we'd have to get in trouble with some New York food safety, but I digress. So yeah, it's an exciting time to see the boys learning in different ways.
Thank you. And thank you to all my colleagues for sharing your thoughts. And, you know, Amy, I know you all in the admissions office talk about the next generation school for boys. And certainly, you know, I believe that that's what has been created here, that we're doing boys' education differently than anywhere else. This morning, I just spent some time summarizing some data of a recent survey, and I just want to conclude by sharing some of this data with you. We participated along with probably a couple hundred schools across the country in a national survey that looked into high school students' sense of belonging and engagement at their school. And we just got our data back last week. We won't get the comparative data with all the other schools back to December rather. But this is data that is reported in what is called a Likert scale. So you have a statement, and ones and twos represent strongly disagree or disagree. A 3 represents, you know, kind of neutral, and then a 4 is strongly agree, highly agree. And here is just some statements and where our students reported as being. And keep in mind, we surveyed them at 8 o'clock in the morning in October, 6 weeks into the school year. And if you are the parents of boys, you know that a lot of a boy's response is, I could go either way. So, you know, let me share this data with you. To the statement, I feel emotionally safe at school. 82.5% of our boys said that they strongly agreed with that statement. I feel supported toward achieving my potential. 85% said they agreed with that. I have at least one trusted adult to whom I can go to at any time. 90% said they had that. I have at least one close friend that I can go to, 88%. The school helps me set high expectations for myself. 88.6% of the boys said, yeah, that rings true. I feel prepared to adapt to face new challenges. 89% of the boys said, yes, that is, I feel that way here. I have learned how to advocate for myself. 82%. I feel comfortable being myself. 85.6% of the boys. I feel passionate about at least one subject. 84.5%. I feel that I have a strong level of control over my success here or in my failure. This is the autonomy question. 85% said they felt that. And I feel prepared in handling stressful situations, 81.2%. And then we've also tracked the neutral responses, and we track the ones that are at the small number, the 2% that says, no, I don't feel that. We want to find out, you know, these are anonymous, but we have work to do there. But the numbers are really very positive. And they speak to what I was speaking about earlier, our goals of creating an environment where boys can explore their own self-awareness and be engaged. And to circle back to the data, I'd much rather be working with this data than the data that I shared with you at the beginning. And this data reflects boys who are engaged, who are really discovering who they are. And that's something that that I know I speak for my colleagues, that we're proud to be part of doing this work with young men here at Trinity-Pawling. Amy, I'll turn it back to you. And I don't know if there have been questions that have come up. We've hit
Thank
our
you.
hour, but
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I think it was um, a phenomenal evening. So thank you all for your time and insights. Really, it was very impressive to me, and I've been here half my life. The questions, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, have been answered for the most part about communication and things. This session will be recorded. It is being recorded. It will be available, as all of our webinars are, on our website. So you'll be able to find it in the future, you know, another week or so. We do have a recommendation for a book I'll just give real quickly, by David Brooks. Katie, you and I have spoken about this, on how to know a person, about communication and forming friendships and engaging others. I really do believe that we got into all those skills, as we talked about, both soft and not so soft. So I think that the questions have been answered for the most part. Please, if you have any remaining questions, please feel free to reach out to us at admissions or send us an email, give us a call if there are any other concerns that you might have. Our next webinar is on January 6th. And the topic then is the power of mentoring boys. So we'll get more into the relationships aspect and how our incredible faculty and staff do act as mentors to the and young men, I should add, because we are raising these boys into young men, and it is such a rewarding career, way of life, that I'm very honored to have been here. We're thankful to all of you. We are a couple minutes past our time, so we're being respectful of that. We will sign off and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much, everyone.